want to tell you a story about a guy I used to know from way back. His name was Jovan, one of the hardest working people I've ever met. But before he became that guy on the construction site everyone looked up to, or feared, depending on who you ask, he had a rough start. Like, a really rough start. Jovan grew up in a tiny village, and his family life was basically a tragedy from the start. His dad died when he was just 5. Some accident at a factory job, I think. And not long after, his mum just kind of disappeared. Some said she ran off. Others said she had a breakdown and was institutionalized. Either way, Jovan and his older brother were left to fend for themselves. His brother tried to raise him for a while, but the guy was only a teenager himself, so it didn't go well. Eventually, the brother ended up in jail for stealing copper wire. After that, Jovan was alone. In school, he was the kid everyone picked on. Always wore the same torn hoodie, always looked like he hadn't eaten properly in days. He was quiet, didn't talk much, and that just made him an easier target. I remember one time a group of kids tied his shoes together and pushed him down the stairs. Just pure cruelty. And the teachers, they didn't care. They looked at him like he was just another lost cause. By the time he was 13, he just stopped showing up to school. No one even noticed for a week. No one cared. Eventually, he officially dropped out. After that, he started picking up odd jobs, shoveling snow, cleaning out gutters, hauling junk, anything he could do to eat. Then when he was around 17, he landed a job at a construction company as a junior carpenter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. He showed up every day like clockwork, always earlier than anyone else. Dirty boots, old tools, eyes like someone who's already lived 5 lives, and I swear even back then there was this quiet fire in him, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. Little did we know he really did. So, like I said, Jovan got that job as a junior carpenter when he was about 17. That construction company? It was rough. Real old-school type place. Lots of yelling, back-breaking work, and a pecking order like a prison yard. And because Jovan didn't finish school, didn't have parents, didn't really talk much, they saw him as the weakest link from day one. I worked on the same sites for a while. Saw the whole thing. They called him names, made him do the grunt work no one else wanted. Hauling bricks across muddy terrain in the rain, climbing dangerous scaffolding without proper safety gear, crawling under houses with rats and mould just because someone else didn't want to get dirty. One guy, I remember, used to toss his cigarette butts at him and say, "Fetch that, dog." And Jovan would just pick them up, flick them aside, and keep working. It wasn't like he didn't feel it. He did. You could see it in the way his jaw clenched when someone barked an order at him, or how he'd go quiet when they started in with the jokes. But he never exploded, never fought back, not once. He just put his head down and got it done. Every single time. He was always the first one on site. I mean, always. Even if the shift started at 6 a.m., he'd be there by 5:15, sweeping or organising tools. Some mornings I'd get there early myself and he'd already be there with a thermos of cheap instant coffee and a Bible, mumbling to himself in the half-light. Every day, like a mantra, he'd say, "God protect me, and I'll be the one laughing at the end." We all thought it was weird back then. The other guys would roll their eyes and say, "Here he goes with his church nonsense again." Someone once told him straight to his face, "You'll never be anything but a tool monkey. Just work and shut up." That line stuck with me because of what came later. Still, Jovan never stopped. He learned faster than anyone. If a foreman showed him how to frame a wall once, the next day he'd be doing it better than the guy who taught him. Quietly, without showboating. He didn't make friends, not really. People didn't want to be seen hanging out with the orphan, as they called him behind his back. But he kept showing up, kept improving, and kept getting passed over for promotions in favour of lazier guys who kissed up to management. He lived in this tiny rented room behind a gas station for years. He'd patched together furniture from leftover job site scraps. I saw him once sanding a makeshift table he made out of an old shipping pallet. When I asked why he bothered, he just shrugged and said, "One day I'll need to know how to build things right." It wasn't just work he put effort into. He started reading business books, finance books, stuff that none of us understood. I remember catching him on break one time with a tattered copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad and a notepad full of scribbles. I laughed and said, "What, planning to become the next Elon Musk?" He just smiled and said, "Why not?" People laughed at that for days. Jovan kept every paycheck close to his chest, never went out drinking with the crew, never bought anything flashy, just basic groceries, rent and saving. Obsessively saving. We used to joke he must have had millions buried in his mattress. Turns out, we weren't that far off. He started buying scratchers and lottery tickets maybe once a week. Not like a gambler, more like it was part of his routine, like someone saying a prayer before bed. When I asked him why, he said, "If you're digging a hole, you still keep one eye out for the ladder." It's strange thinking about it now, because back then, nobody believed in him. Not the workers, not the bosses, not even the interns. He was just Jovan, the poor kid who did whatever you told him. The guy you could blame for something going wrong, the one who stayed quiet and took it. Looking back, I think it wasn't that he didn't know what was happening around him. He knew. He just had patience like nobody I've ever met. He once told me something that only made sense years later. He said, "People only see where you are, not where you're going. That's their mistake." That construction site became like a twisted home for him. The longer he stayed, the more embedded the cruelty got. They didn't see him as a co-worker anymore. He was part of the background, like a power drill or a wheelbarrow. Useful, quiet, disposable. But all that changed the day those lottery numbers hit. And oh man, did it change. I still remember the exact day everything changed for Jovan. It was a Friday. Everyone was sitting around during lunch break, smoking, laughing, busting his chops like always. Someone had spilled coffee on a toolbox and made him clean it up even though it wasn't his. He just nodded and got on his knees with some old rags like it was nothing. Same old routine. What none of us knew, what he had found out the night before, was that he had just won the national lottery. And I don't mean some measly few thousand. I'm talking millions, like life-changing money, the kind you only ever see in headlines or movies. Jovan, the guy who used to save screws in a jar to avoid buying more, had just become a millionaire. But he didn't say a word. He showed up the next day like normal. Same boots, same torn hoodie, same thermos of instant coffee. He worked through the weekend too, hammering, measuring, double-checking angles like it was any other job. Not even a hint that something was different. Then Monday came. We all showed up groggy and half hungover from the weekend. Some guys were already arguing about who had to unload the next delivery. Nobody noticed the 3 black SUVs parked out front at first, until this tall guy in a suit stepped out with a clipboard and a thick envelope. He walked straight into the site office without saying a word. 10 minutes later, the foreman, who used to spit when he talked to Jovan, came out looking pale as a ghost. Behind him, Jovan. But he didn't look like Jovan anymore. He was still in work boots, sure, but they were new. His jeans were clean. He had a real jacket, a proper one, and he stood like a man who owned the ground he was standing on. His eyes, I'll never forget them. They weren't angry. They were calm. Too calm. The foreman cleared his throat and said, everybody gather around." We thought it was just another safety briefing, or maybe someone got injured. Then Jovan stepped forward. "I'm sure most of you haven't noticed me for the past 10 years, he started, real soft. "That's fine. You weren't supposed to, but now I need your attention." You could hear people mumbling. Someone even laughed nervously, but he just kept going. "Last week, I won the lottery, and yesterday I bought 60% of this company." That shut everyone up. Dead silence. You could have heard a nail drop. Guys looked at each other, waiting for the punchline, thinking this was some elaborate joke. But Jovan pulled out the paperwork. Signed, stamped, real. Not only had he bought the company, he had become the majority owner. Then he said, "This place gave me 10 years of pain, 10 years of humiliation. I told myself, if God protects me, I'll be the one laughing at the end. And today is that day." No one moved. I think a few guys still thought it was a prank. Then came the hammer. Effective immediately, 95% of the current employees on this site are terminated. People lost it. Yelling, shouting, some tried to get in his face, until the security team that came with the suits stepped forward and made it very clear the firings were final and the property was now under new ownership. The same guys who used to call him names, gone. The ones who made him work Christmas while they sat around drinking, gone. The only people he kept were a few older workers who had treated him with basic decency. Guys who showed him how to sand properly or lent him a better drill when his broke. Not saints, just people who weren't cruel for no reason. He made them foremen, raised their pay, and told them, "From now on, we build things right." You've never seen grown men so stunned. One guy who used to ride Jovan the hardest tried to beg, actually begged, on his knees, saying he had kids to feed. Jovan looked at him, paused for a second, then just said, "You should have thought about that before calling me rat boy for 5 years." Brutal. Cold, maybe, but honest and earned. The next few months were chaos in the industry. Word spread fast. Jovan the orphan, the joke, the poor carpenter, was now the owner, and he wasn't quiet about what had happened either. He gave interviews, donated to youth shelters, and even helped fund trades programs for dropouts. Not to boast, he always kept it humble, but to make a point. Never underestimate someone who's still standing after you've tried everything to break them. The company, it didn't just survive, it started thriving. New contracts, better quality control, better safety standards. Jovan reinvested heavily, updated tools, better benefits, proper training programs. He swore no one under his leadership would be treated the way he had been. That moment on the site, when he stood there and fired almost the entire crew, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming his own worth and proving something, not just to them, but to himself. And damn if he didn't. It's been 10 years since that day on the construction site. 10 years since Jovan flipped the entire world upside down with one piece of paper and a lifetime of quiet resilience. And let me tell you something. He didn't just get lucky. He earned every inch of what came next. Today, the company, now rebranded under a new name, is one of the most respected construction firms in the region. Jovan kept expanding, slowly, methodically. No shortcuts, no ego. He started with smaller projects, affordable housing, community centres, even a rehab clinic in the same neighbourhood where he grew up. Now, he's leading major commercial builds and green infrastructure projects. The guy who used to sweep up drywall dust now sits in meetings with architects and city planners. But here's what really blows people's minds. Jovan's company doesn't just work well, it treats its people right. Employees under him earn on average 30% more than what the competition offers. Full health benefits, paid training, profit sharing. He even gives extra PTO for single parents and caregivers. You don't see that in this industry. Not ever. People want to work for him. He gets hundreds of applications a month, not because the pay is great, though it is, but because word's gotten around. He's a good man. And yeah, I know some people thought he was going to become bitter. That after everything they put him through, he'd turn into one of those cold, ruthless bosses. But no, that's not who Jovan is. He doesn't forget where he came from. He visits job sites all the time, eats lunch with the crew, picks up a hammer now and then just to remind himself what it felt like. He knows every employee by name, not because he's trying to look good, but because he genuinely cares. I bumped into him recently, actually. I was at a hardware store picking up some stuff for a home project, and there he was. Same quiet smile, just a little older, little more weathered, but still Jovan. I asked him how things were going. He said, "Better than I could have ever dreamed, but it's not about me anymore. It's about making sure no kid goes through what I did." He runs scholarships now, funds vocational schools. He even started a mentorship program for foster youth interested in the trades. You know what he calls it? The Ladder. Says every kid digging in the dark deserves to know there's a way out. And that, right there, that's the guy I remember. Not just the poor orphan who used to get pushed around, not just the lottery winner who fired the whole damn site, but the man who looked hell in the eye and said, "You don't get to define me." Now the world knows who he is, and finally they say his name with respect.